I love doing these little parent discussions each week so we can talk about little topics at a time rather than trying to share a lot of information at one time because it makes it easier for everyone if we do little bits at a time that is a little bit more digestible and able to be able to talk about one piece at a time and then really think about the aspects and be able to think about it at home. And then we come back next week and we kind of talk about another little aspect and we keep going from there. So the way that we think about a neurodiverse child, whether they have an autism diagnosis or they don't have an autism diagnosis yet, is really we just kind of look at them as a everything is interlocking and everything works together. And some kids have challenges in one area versus other areas, but all areas work to either strengthen each other, or if there's challenges in one area over another area, those can impact each other. And I think every year we kind of try to understand our kids in different ways, it is helpful to kind of dissect what each of the pieces and break it down. Even for my teachers, this is how we break it down, but especially for parents, I think the more you understand the elements of every child, the more you're going to be able to understand where your child has a strength and where there are areas that we want to help them and understand their individual difference. And that helps us as parents become more empowered to feel successful and competent in helping our child, and vice versa, helps the child feel more safe and comfortable in the environment the more we work to understand them and they feel understood at the same time. So kind of the four areas that encompass everything around how we support every child and neurodivergent children, especially, we really start everything with the frame of regulation. And then amongst that, then we're always working on social relationships, which embed social communication. And at the same time, we're building up play because a child to be able to connect and engage and to be able to play have to come from a regulation foundation. And then what is so incredibly important, and I think it can be very underestimated, is executive functioning and how that plays into it, and how we as teachers at Fuse or parents at home, how us setting up the environment, previewing, understanding that some kids are auditory learners, some kids are visual learners, how we set up their kind of executive functioning world really makes a huge difference in terms of their success model. So over the many weeks, we will talk about each of these four components, and kind of, as you see with the Venn diagram, it all makes the whole child, but each component has its own piece and plays a very different factor in every single child, and especially kids who are neurodivergent and brains are strengthened in one area over another area. So for the next couple of weeks, we're going to talk about regulation because every child, to be able to engage, to be able to feel safe in their own environment, really depends on their regulation state and how comfortable they feel in that environment. And regulation plays a huge key and sometimes can be misunderstood and confusing to understand that when we say regulated, that doesn't mean that dysregulation is bad or is not okay. And what regulation means is going to feel and look different in different environments and in different settings. So even within our day today, the kids went out early because it's now raining. So you walk into school and typically it's morning play where they're really playing on the floor in the classrooms, which is a specific type of regulated state. But then all of a sudden we switched the plan and we all went outside. So then their regulation state adapted to the environment. And now we're outside and we're playing and we're excited to be outside. So your regulation adapts to your environment, and regulation ebbs and flows and vacillates throughout the day. And because there are tricky moments throughout the day, that can also really lead to moments of dysregulation that can come back to regulation. So that is an important fact. And this is a great, I can send you her Instagram and podcast. She is a great person. I think she's an OT that talks about regulation state. So I'm going to let you guys listen to the way she talks about regulation.
I want to clear up what sometimes can be a misunderstanding about regulation and dysregulation. The way that regulation is talked about, the way that it's described, can sometimes lend to the illusion that regulation is somehow better than dysregulation. And that's actually not the case. Regulation is not better than dysregulation, it's just part of the equation. Now, as I'm saying this, you might be thinking, "Gee, but regulation feels so much better than dysregulation." And here's why I'm saying what I'm saying. It's part of a cycle for growth. When we move through the world and we perceive and experience a challenge of some kind, we take it on, right? We get dysregulated. You might think of in these moments, the dysregulation is helping us move into a place of growth. We got to work it. It's hard. We got to widen our window of tolerance. We're in action, or we're going towards immobilization, or we're having to work it because there's a challenge that we are experiencing. And then the regulation, if we know how to regulate, if we have good regulation skills, we bring those moments of regulation in, like the breath in the midst of the anxiety, like the movement in the midst of the fatigue, like the whatever it is that we're doing to connect to ourselves in the midst of the activation. And we bring the regulation, the connection in for rest. The regulation or the regulatory part of the cycle is our rest and integration part of the cycle. It's the moment where our system goes, okay, let me integrate all that learning. Because what's going to happen is we're going to then perceive our next challenge. And once again, we're in dysregulation. And once again, we're in the phase of growth and having to adapt and having to transform and having to expand. And then hopefully we know how to bring in some regulation, that connection to ourselves, so that we can start to bring in a place of rest, a place of connection, so that the system can integrate. Because what's going to happen next? We're on to our next perception of a challenge. And once again, we're dysregulated. And on we go. So to say that regulation is better than dysregulation is missing the larger picture. Both of them are needed for growth. You can't grow if all you have is dysregulation. You also can't grow if all you have is regulation, because you have nothing to grow from. So dysregulation and regulation go hand in hand. Both are needed. Both are essential for integration. Both are needed for our growth and our evolution. Both are equally important in our nervous system and in our development. So when you're thinking about both, if you find yourself saying, oh, regulation is so much better, maybe you can create a little bit of a pause or some reflection to really allow this conversation to come in and remind yourself, no, it's not better. It's just the the experience that allows me to rest and to integrate, because I'm going to be on to my next challenge quite quickly. And I need to rest and integrate to go on to my next challenge. And then I need to rest and integrate to go on from that challenge, and so on and so on and so on. So embrace both sides. They're both there for a reason, and they're both part of what's necessary for us as human beings on this planet.
So I think what's really helpful, oh wait, hold on. What's helpful is to understand, I think, as parents, we equate regulation to calm. We want our kids to be calm, which obviously is easier for us. But I think they're really, to her point, is it is okay for kids to be silly. It is okay for them to kind of get out of that comfort zone and learn how. I think one of our biggest goals at Fuse is to help kids learn how and what strategies are necessary when in that dysregulated state to become regulated. And that is really where we work in tandem with the OTs to come up with, like, oh, for this child, pushing a cube chair really works, or for this child, going in a dark space really works. So what our real mission is we're not going to put out the fires before they happen. It's okay if a child doesn't get the tow truck they want outside, or it's okay if they don't get a blue chair at circle time, but we're going to help them in those moments. And that's one piece of dysregulation. But even those pieces of dysregulation come with understanding of, oh, I'm really upset. What can I do in this moment? And, oh, wait, I actually use this tool and this tool, and now I feel more regulated. So I think there are many, many different types of dysregulation. It could be the very, very silly. It could be more like we call kids having the zoomies. It could be some kids, when their dysregulation really shut down because they go more internal, or like this one talks about limited eye contact. Some kids become more external when their system is feeling dysregulated. Some kids get much more internal, and that's really dependent on different systems and what your body does in those moments of dysregulation. And I think what kind of the biggest piece is, at Fuse, the teachers are working so hard in this month, or September to October, to really understand each individual child and what helps them at a given moment, and what is their dysregulation and what is their regulation. So what's interesting is lots of kids will come to Fuse and they sit for circle and they look the part, and we do not initially see that dysregulation, but that doesn't mean it's not there. It means they're really masking and kind of holding it in. And then those are the kids that at home have really big emotions or get really, really silly. So our goal is we want to be able to see that ebb and the flow and the work through from regulation to the silly or the zoomies, or a child who's like has a hard time being in the group at times, because then it allows us to really think about how we help them move through those regulation states, and how we help them in those moments. I'm going to watch, this is another video on how kind of that same concept of regulation doesn't always mean calm.
Let's talk about one of the number one myths about regulation, and that is that regulation means calm. But regulation doesn't actually mean calm. Regulation means to connect. It's referring to a moment of mindful awareness where we are connected to ourselves in the midst of whatever other experience we're having. It's not actually about being calm at all. So, for example, let's say that we're having a moment of feeling angry. The thought would be, oh, I need to regulate to calm down. but actually I regulate so I can connect to myself, so I can be present with myself in the midst of all the activation. Because the likelihood that you're going to be able to go from angry and activated to calm, that's a journey. So when we say that regulation means calm, we actually miss that part of the journey. And the journey that we're missing is the relationship that we're developing with ourselves when we're in all of these states. Because every single one of our states ultimately deserves to be in relationship with. Calm is not better than angry. Calm is not better than sad. Calm is not better than overwhelmed. In fact, we can even think about emotional intelligence as the ability to be with, which is really ultimately what regulation is all about. So next time you find yourself saying, oh, I need to calm down, I need to regulate to calm, how about I'm going to regulate so I can connect, so I can be with myself in whatever state I'm having, because all parts of me are worthy of being in connection to.
So I think that is very important and really what we as parents want to help our kids with when they are we want to understand their regulate what helps them be regulated, which means, as she was saying, is what helps them engage and what do they need to help them connect and be able to be present in the moment. And in those moments where they are frustrated or where they are angry or where their body is really zooming, our goal is not to quell them, to make them just stop moving, because one, we're never going, that's going to be a very lofty goal. And if they stop moving, then their internal system is not regulated. It just means it doesn't feel right, but they've stopped their outer body from moving. So it doesn't mean the brain and the body are more connected. It just means they've stopped their body, but their internal system is still dysregulated. So they're not connecting. They're just sedentary, but dysregulated. So what we try to do a lot, and why you see that there is constant movement all the time, is we're trying to get more of the brain and the body connected, which allows kids to engage and be present in the moment, which is why, like, parents will say, well, okay, you're having them push a beanbag down the hallway. What is that going to do for them in life? You can't push a beanbag down the hallway forever. Totally true. But if we can help kids at these younger ages understand the feeling of being engaged, the feeling of having your brain body connected in a way that is purposeful, then at a certain point, running down the hallway is not going to feel so dysregulating for them. And then we can take the beanbag away and they understand that being engaged in the hallway means I'm walking and I'm thinking about the people around me, rather than when it was initially, this is a really long hallway, there's so many lights, I am feeling totally dysregulated, so I'm going to run and zoom. If we have them push a beanbag, if you think about it, just from like a sensory regulation standpoint, if I am pushing a beanbag down the hallway, my brain and body have to be connected, or I'm going to either fall on top of the beanbag or I'm going to get distracted and run the beanbag into something. But if I'm actually connected and engaged in that moment, I'm actually creating a regulatory moment um, for myself, or what we're doing as parents or teachers are superimposing that regulation by creating a way that for them to move that feels more purposeful than just running. And what we do as parents a lot is we will hold a child's hand, but if you watch, a lot of times kids are way ahead of us and we're like pulling their arm. So in fact, they're not connected to us at all. We're just keeping them safe. What we want to do in those moments is get them to regulate, meaning at that moment co-regulate with us, so that they're engaged and connected and their brain and their body are with us. So we do at Fuse, and what I would recommend a lot to parents is you can either hold on to something or you can hold their hand if that feels safer, but move in a purposeful way, do big giant steps, or pretend like you're walking like penguins so that they're thoughtfully connecting in that moment with each other, with you and themselves, so that it becomes a more of a brain body connection. That being said, kind of the next step of regulation becomes how much can we push, and when and how are we going to push a child, and when is it time to, like walking in the hallway, when is it time to really push that demand of co-regulating versus when is it time to just have them walk in the hallway with very low demands. And that really is what, listening to the woman before, is thinking about their threshold and what have they done today that is already demanding of them, and what is going to tip them over the edge. So then we get into, and this is, I think, a very, very important factor as parents and as teachers, is thinking about a child's window of tolerance. And that is going to be incredibly individualized, individually different between each child. What my window of tolerance versus someone else's window of tolerance is quite different, in both a good way and a bad way. But of 6 kids in a classroom, or if you have, like I have 4 kids, my different kids' window of tolerance is very, very dependent on the situation and what's happening in that moment, of what I can expect them to take on and what I can expect that is going to be too much for them to take on. So we're gonna listen to one aspect of talking about window of tolerance.
When you're coping well with the ups and downs of life, when your thoughts are rational and your emotions are calm, you are said to be functioning within your window of tolerance. The window of tolerance was originally described by Dr. Dan Siegel as the optimal zone of arousal. If you stay within your window of tolerance, you're able to process and successfully respond to the demands of everyday life. So let's imagine you get a phone call from your boss and she asks you to do additional work over the weekend. Now, that stressor may increase your level of arousal, maybe even to put you at the edge of your window of tolerance. But if you're still within that window, you can handle the stress and stay clear headed. During times of extreme stress, you can move outside of your window of tolerance into a state of hyperarousal. The sympathetic nervous system is ignited and the fight or flight response activated. In this state, you may feel angry, irritable, chaotic, hypervigilant, anxious, have racing thoughts, and a sense of restlessness. Hyperarousal results in the deactivation of your prefrontal cortex, which is responsible for executive function such as attention and impulse control. When the prefrontal cortex is essentially shut down, it's very difficult to think clearly and rationally. Stress can also make you plummet into a hypoaroused state. The parasympathetic nervous system is engaged and you freeze in response to stress or danger. In this state, you may feel overwhelmed, emotionally numb, exhausted, lack motivation, and feel depressed. Your body posture may collapse or curl up in a ball, and you may disconnect or dissociate in order to cope. So, in the hypo-aroused state, you have essentially shut down. Everyone's window of tolerance is different. For example, Peter has a wide window of tolerance for meeting deadlines and working evenings and weekends. Peter can tolerate the intensity of work well and the associated emotions. But Peter's window of tolerance quickly narrows when he's in a potential conflict situation. His blood begins to boil and he quickly moves into a hyper-aroused state of rage. At this point, Peter's emotions are intense and difficult to manage. We all have different windows due to factors such as childhood experiences, social support, coping skills, and our neurobiology. For example, trauma survivors often have narrow windows and tend to spend a lot of time in a hyper or hypo aroused state. Now, the good news is that you can widen your window of tolerance and therefore increase your ability to manage stress. For example, if you are hyper aroused, you might find it helpful to use techniques that settle your mind and body, such as mindful breathing, listening to calming music, going for a gentle walk, or talking to a friend. If shifting from a hypo-aroused state, this tends to require getting more active, so going for a brisk walk, doing some exercise, or engaging socially. Stimulating the senses via smell or touch, listening to uplifting music, or eating some food with a strong taste or crunchy texture. Psychological therapy may also widen your window as it can provide an external.
So that I like that explanation because I think if we understand our own window of tolerance, it helps us understand our kids' window of tolerance. I always have teachers do an exercise around giving them scenarios and trying to gauge what their window of tolerance is and how they would react to different scenarios. I think as parents, our window of tolerance is different at different times after a stressful day. If I'm going home and being bombarded by my kids, my tolerance for how patient and I'm going to be in taking in all the things, the input they're giving me is going to be slimmer. My window of tolerance is much smaller. Whereas if I didn't have a lot of demands on my day, I'm going to be able to go home and we'll have a wider window of tolerance for taking in their information or their questions or whatever is happening at home. I think in thinking about our kids and thinking about their fight or flight, every single one of their ways of fight, flight, or freeze, I think if we start with a window of tolerance in every scenario of, oh, wait, were they, what was happening at that time? What were they maybe reacting to? Or thinking about going into a scenario, what's going to be tricky about that? Just for example, today, if we think about it, every single kid was coming out of their car being like, is it going to rain today? Are we going to not be able to go to recess? So they're already feeling like the schedule might change. And for most of them, they love going outside and they were very focused or worried that they weren't going to get that outside time. So they're already thinking about things, which is going to collapse that tolerance for something else happening. So for example, this morning, I had an intake. So I was bringing a child into the classroom, which is always different and new for kids. Most of the time, kids can be open and greet a child because it's their window of tolerance is wide. It's a safe environment. This morning, teachers had just shared that we're going to look at the weather and see if we're going to go outside. Then I bring a new friend in. Their ability to tolerate a new friend coming into their play was smaller in that moment. So one friend said to me, why do you always bring in new friends? That's a totally fair comment to make. He didn't shut down on the friend, but may not have seemed as pleasing to the other child. But in his mind, what I then said was, oh, there's so many things different today. We may not be able to go outside. And you didn't know I was bringing a friend in. And that immediately validated and allowed him to realize, like, yeah, it's a lot of different. He doesn't hate this friend. He doesn't know this friend. He doesn't mind typically if I bring a friend in, but today it just was too much at that moment. So then our kids and different kids have different reactions to these moments outside hyper or hypo arousal where they could go into that fight, flight, or freeze. Some kids look at the hallway, and if it was just me and a child in the hallway, they do remarkable. They'll walk with me, we'll talk about what they're doing, what's happening in the classroom, and we are connected, we are regulated, we are in the moment together. Their window of tolerance of me and engagement and unpredictability is wide. It could be the same day, literally 10 minutes later, we turn the corner and there's three groups. One is on beanbags, one is down the hall moving a parachute and one is at the bathrooms, which is where we're headed, they're already seeing multiple demands possibly being placed on them and multiple things that are different. It's now incredibly loud. It's incredibly unpredictable, both visually and is someone going to be in the bathroom so they may not be able to go. So then what happens in those moments is their window of tolerance goes very narrow, so their ability to regulate with me is much more difficult. So in that moment, I am not asking them to adapt to me. I'm reading the environment and realizing, okay, this is going to be a flight moment. They are going to look at this hallway and bolt down the hallway because they just want to get out of this now incredibly demanding environment. So then what I do is stop in that moment and say, oh, I'm feeling like it'd be great to hold hands. Do you want to hold hands or do you want to hold something? Like we could get something to hold. And then they may say nothing because they're already overwhelmed, or they may start running. And then I can say, oh, I feel like a hand would be a really great way to get through this super loud hallway. And at the same time, I'm sharing with them, this is loud. This is different than when we were in the hallway 5 minutes ago. I wonder if headphones might help you in the hallway or something like that, to allow them to tolerate a situation that feels outside of their tolerance zone at that time. Or I take all the other demands out of it. We hold hands, we walk to the bathroom. I'm not asking them to regulate or engage with me. And we get to where we're going, because at that time, that's the intention of, we're just moving down the hallway because it's so busy. And so I modulate my intention around what the environment is and what their window of tolerance is. And I think a really important factor of that is kind of the whole idea of um, tip of the iceberg versus underlying. In that moment, what might be at the tip of the iceberg is, oh man, that friend just ran down the hallway, but they're not trying to be behavioral. They're not trying to actually escape. They have nowhere to go. Their system is so dysregulated from the noise, from all the visual unpredictability, because 5 minutes earlier they had been in a really quiet hallway. So now what we're seeing tip of the iceberg is a kid who runs. But what we as parents need to think about is, wait a minute, what has changed in their system and what has changed in their environment that created a very, very different tip of the iceberg behavior than what could have happened on a different day. And I feel like what I hear so much from parents so much of the time is like, well, it's so unpredictable. We could go into the same place at the same time and my child would act completely different. That's totally valid, but that's the tip of the iceberg, rather than, is it is it the same environment? Is it the same thing happening? I'd venture to guess, I'd lay money on something was different. The car ride, I mean, it's so subtle and our kids are so incredibly perceptive and smart. Maybe you went a different way. Maybe the music that you played wasn't their choice, it was brother, sister's choice, or maybe as a parent, you weren't thinking about it and just played something else. Maybe they got to wherever you were going. Maybe it was a playground and it's 10 times busier than it was the time before. And so it wasn't about the intention of the playground. It was about the four things that led up to it that just squished and squished and squished their window of tolerance. So what happens from that is they get hyper aroused, which means they get dysregulated and now they're zooming around the playground. Whereas before, when there was less kids there, they were regulated and connected to you. Or they get under aroused and they don't want to leave the car because it's too much for them. Just, example from the intake I did this morning, the child was super engaged with me and we were playing in the movement room and he was really chatting with me and being so engaged and connected and regulated. We walk up to the classroom we were going to visit and he was fine walking up to it. All the friends come to the door and are so excited to meet him, and his entire body turned backwards, and the mom was trying to turn him around, and I was like, wait a minute, he's totally fine. He was feeling overwhelmed by 5 kids coming to the door. So he turned his body. He was still listening. He was in the moment. If the mom, which of course she was trying to do the right thing, turned his body around, that would have overwhelmed him, and he might have run or he might have shut down, but he was doing the best he could in that moment. Of he turned his body, and I said, hey, he's listening. I see his ears are listening. And so every single kid said their name, and then one of the peers' name could be a boy or a girl. And so when she said her name, he said, without looking yet, he said, wait a minute, I have a friend named Dylan. And then I said to our Dylan, I wonder if it's a boy or a girl. And she said, oh, I'm a girl. Is it a boy or a girl? And then he turned his body to then face the group and be a part of the group, because it made sense and he had that connection. And then all of a sudden, you could see his regulation was happening because he was connecting and his window of tolerance was increasing at that moment. So I think it's really important to talk about window of tolerance and regulation and tip of the iceberg. What I want to pause here, but because going into the sensory system is like a whole piece in and of itself. So what I kind of love to do is like save the last 10 minutes for questions, and think about, and you can give examples or that are for your child or just questions in general. But if we think about kind of those moments that we see the fight, the flight, or freeze, what is, even this week, if you really look at your kids, don't look at the moment. Here's my like homework. Don't look at the moment, because the moment is not the issue. What happened before that moment? And you may have to go back to 10 steps back, because it could have been an amazing car ride and the playground looks the same, but oh wait, there was something about lunch that was tricky. And now all of a sudden their system is going through that regulation to dysregulation. So what is in that moment causing them to have a shutdown or being dysregulated, where you didn't feel like there was something that caused the dysregulation? And in thinking about what the woman said when she was speaking about that, it's not, you can't just have a world of regulation. You can't just have a world of dysregulation. So our goal is really helping our kids through the moments of dysregulation to come back to regulation. So like, let's use the playground example as to think about. The playground is busy. Now we're seeing that our child is zooming around, let's say. So really in that moment, connecting with them, getting on their level and saying, oh, the playground feels different to me right now. I wonder what you're thinking. And then they may say, oh, it's fine, and just zooming, or they're giggling and like can't really connect with you. So then you could either, which I always recommend to any parent, is having a whiteboard in their bag all the time to put on a whiteboard, because sometimes language is so much for our kids that now we're just like adding to their inability to connect. And the window of tolerance is so minimal that language is just too much. So putting on a whiteboard a slide, like maybe their two favorite things at the playground, like a slide and a swing, and just saying, oh, I see the swing is open. Are you thinking swing or slide first? So and that goes to the executive functioning piece, but taking away the overwhelmingness of the situation and zooming in on what they can feel competent at, and being like, there's so many friends, there's so many people here, but I know we love the slide. I'm thinking slide first and then swing. What are you thinking? And maybe they're thinking swing first, but giving them a piece to feel competent about rather than having the big piece, because that's going to take them into more of that. I feel overwhelmed. I'm feeling more and more dysregulated. It's okay to feel overwhelmed, but that's where we, as the supporter, can come in and help them find a moment of regulation within that dysregulation almost. So happy to answer questions or